Hey, how many of you remember the last time USC played at Oregon? I do.
You are Locked On Trojans, your daily podcast on the USC Trojans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Fight on, everyone. I'm your host, Mark Culkin, and thank you for making Locked On USC your first listen every day. Whether you're watching the show on YouTube or wherever you plan to download it, this show is free. I appreciate your support. You can show your appreciation. If you're watching on YouTube, become a subscriber. It's quick, it's easy, it's free. It means a lot to the show. Just click that red subscribe button. And when you see this, that thumbs up, that means a whole heck of a lot. Make sure you hit that. And also make sure you click that bell notification button so you don't miss one episode Monday through Friday, as well as the post-game reactions. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. I told you on yesterday's episode of Locked on USC that the Trojans were 2 touchdown dogs heading up to Oregon this weekend. 14.5 points. And it's not because USC can't score. We know that's not the case. We know they are very capable of putting up anywhere between 42 and 50 points per game regularly. It's the reason they're a significant underdog is because its defense is terrible. Or as Charles Barkley would say, terrible. Look, USC has some really nice players who make some really great plays. But as a unit, defensively, they're terrible. Look, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm not calling the players trash. But, if we just want to look at statistics, they're terrible. That's why Alex Grinch was fired. Anyways, getting back to the topic at hand here. The last time USC played at Oregon was way back in 2015. Yeah, it's been a while. Then both teams were ranked, both in the 20s. Both had 7-3 records. By the end of the game, this will sound a little familiar. USC secondary, they gave up a team record 6 touchdown passes. The quarterback's name was Vernon Adams. All day long, all game long, Oregon's wide receivers were running wide open. I mean, Vernon had a Heisman-like day. There's no other way to describe it. He was 20 for 25 throwing the ball, 407 yards on 20 pass completions. I mentioned the 6 touchdowns. Oh, he made a mistake. He had 1 interception. C'est la vie, right? Such is life. I'll take 20 for 25, 407, and 6 touchdowns, and 1 pick every week, and I'll feel good. I mean, do the math. 12 games, 6 touchdowns. That's 72 touchdowns. I can handle 72 versus 6. And that would definitely be a Heisman type of situation. Anyways, in that game, it was actually tied 14-14 in the second quarter. And then all of a sudden it was 31-14 early in the third quarter. USC's defense kind of just, they had Alex Grinch moments, I guess is the best way of putting it. And this is what USC has to guard against this weekend. Is Oregon has an explosive offense. It's right up there with the USC's, and I'll get to those numbers here momentarily. But this is what USC's defense has to go up against, is knowing that the Ducks have a decent defense. And most importantly, they're playing with an identity and with confidence. That's what happens when your head coach comes from a defensive mindset. I'm not saying that one's better than the other. I'm saying that right now, Oregon's defense is there to bail out Oregon's offense if Oregon's offense isn't scoring on every drive, which USC has kind of been forced to do this season. This game is going to come down to USC's offensive line giving Caleb enough time to throw the ball. It's not going to be the only thing that comes down to, but that's going to be one of the primary factors. As long as Caleb has just the normal amount of time to kind of drop back, survey the field, and I think USC has a fighting chance to win this game. And if they weren't pissed off already, kind of talked about that on yesterday's episode, maybe Oregon's head coach Dan Lanning, what he shouted out during practice for everybody to hear, maybe that'll get back to USC's locker room. Maybe that'll piss him off. This is what Dan Lanning had to say. And he was sending a message. They got 7-on-7 today in LA. They're doing a walkthrough in LA. We've got a mod bracket up here in Eugene. That was Dan Lanning yelling over the loudspeaker at practice. This is according to reports. And people are wondering, well, what's a mod bracket? Apparently, a mod bracket is a full-speed tackling drill that they do up at Oregon. As I said, he was sending a message. But, you've heard Lincoln Riley. He's not into that type of stuff when I asked him about sending a message earlier in the year. However, USC, let me ask this question. Has USC showed anyone that they're capable of punching back and dominating another team this year? Let me know in the comment section. Like I said, USC might have more playmakers on offense, but I think Oregon has a more balanced offense. And they also have a 6th or 7th year quarterback, whatever year Bo Nix is in. He's been around for a while is the point. He's seen a lot of football. They also have a running back named Bucky Irving, who runs hard. And according to PFF, Pro Football Focus, he knows how to make people miss. He has forced 44 missed tackles this year, which I guess is good enough to be number 1 in the Pac-12. I'm not sure if it means anything. I'm just going to kind of throw this little side note out there. Irving wasn't out there early for Oregon's practice on Tuesday. They have a similar type of practice protocol. The media gets to watch them for the first 15 to 20 minutes, stretching, conditioning. Apparently, Bucky wasn't out there. So this is what USC's defense is going to be up against. I mentioned I was going to go over some numbers. Well, here you go. Remember Lincoln Riley's number 1 scoring offense in the country? Well, it now resides. It's making a home up in Oregon. The Ducks are scoring 47.4 points per game. They have the number 4 passing offense, 330 yards per game. They have the number 10 rushing attack, 200 yards per game. Oh, total offense, number 2 in the country, 538 yards per game. They are also number 1 in first downs. I think they have like 242 total first downs on the year. They're number 3 in the country converting on third downs. That's not one of USC's defensive strengths. And for good measure, they protect the ball pretty well. Good ball security. They're number 1 in the country. In other words, they don't turn the ball over very often. USC's challenges Saturday night aren't, again, I'll say it again, it's not about their own offense. If the O-line plays up to their abilities, USC's offense will score points. It's going to come down to, what can new defensive coordinators Sean Nua and Brian Odom, what can they dial up on short notice? I'm not sure what they're going to learn from last week's film, USC versus Washington. I don't even know if they watched it. I know Mason Cobb said he didn't even watch the film. There was no need. Here's what I do think. I don't think they're going to do the exact same thing defensively, conceptually. Nua kind of smiled and acknowledged it and said, we'll see what we look like on Saturday. He was asked the question, "You're going to do anything different?" I think everybody should anticipate things are going to look a little different. I don't know how much, but they're going to put their own wrinkles in there. And Mason Cobb, he basically confirmed what Coach Nua said. that there'll be some new things. First things first, though. Let's make sure this team isn't leaving their defensive coordinators hanging when they break the huddle on the sideline. Oof, not a good look. I don't know if you've seen it yet. It's out there on social media. Check it out. You can go to Scott Schrader's Instagram account. He has it, I know for sure. USC was leading 28-21. It was late in the second quarter. Timeout on the sideline. Out of the huddle. You know how coaches hold up their hand for that unity high five moment? No one acknowledged Coach Grinch. He was out there. The defensive huddle left him hanging. I think that was the moment where Riley saw it on film. Grinch had lost the trust of his players. And I think that's when the decision was actually made. Lincoln Riley didn't have to sleep on anything. He saw that. USC needs to find its pride on Saturday. One other thing that Mason Cobb said after practice on Tuesday. Are we going to tuck our tail or are we going to stick out our fists and fight? And again, USC's offensive line needs to have their best game of the year. Both of those ideas are synonymous with physical football. Having some pride, sticking out your fist, fighting, physical at the offensive line. If USC does those two things, they're going to have a really good chance of pulling out this victory. And if they do both of those things, sticking out their fist, go punch Dan Lanning's team in the mouth repeatedly. I'm going to dive deeper into this game on tomorrow's episode of Locked on USC. I'll talk about where their offense can stress the Oregon defense. In other words, is USC going to be a pass-first approach? Is it a run-first approach? I'll talk about that on tomorrow's episode. But just know that USC's defense is going to be stressed because I went over the numbers. Oregon does everything well. They throw the ball well. They run the ball well. They don't turn the ball over. So PrizePick is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They are the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including all those pros and the sharks out there who make a living doing this, you're going to pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you can just kind of watch your bank account fill up with the money. PrizePick is a skill-based, real money daily fantasy sports game. PrizePick offers projections on any sport that you watch. College football, college basketball, NFL, Major League Baseball, NBA, hockey, they got it all. What you're going to do is you're going to pick 2 to 6 players, and if they're going to go more or less than their PrizePick projections, and you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. PrizePick entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. Here's a few made-up examples for you. This is what you might see over there on PrizePick. Caleb Williams will have more than or less than 3 passing touchdowns against Oregon. Oregon will have less than or more than 200 rushing yards against USC's defense. USC's defense will have more than 1 Bo Nix interception. PrizePick offers a recently improved deposit and withdrawal experience. If you like using Apple Pay, you have that option. So just go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege. Use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege. Use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. The college football season is here, and this season, Locked On is kicking up our coverage. Every Friday, Locked On will go live from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern on every Locked On College YouTube channel. Locked On College Football Live will cover the college football playoff implications, the conference rivalry games, and they're going to go in-depth like only Locked On can, including insight and analysis from our stable of Locked On College hosts covering their team every day. Find Locked On College Football Live every Friday from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern on any Locked On College YouTube channel. You're not going to want to miss this show. Question, audience, let me know in the comment section. This is an audience participation show. I need your feedback. Does USC have any type of advantage defensively when they show up on Saturday? What will USC's defense surprise Oregon with? Oklahoma and Oregon, I said Oklahoma and Oregon, they actually played against each other in a bowl game before Brian Odom took off and joined Lincoln Riley and Alex Grinch at USC. Brian Odom was the defense coordinator in the Alamo Bowl when Oklahoma beat Oregon. Just putting that out there. So I know that Dan Lanning is going to be, pulling out that old game film to look for any of those tendencies that a Brian Odom defense might look like. He and Sean Nua, again, are co-defensive coordinators for the rest of the season. In fact, Dan Lanning spoke to the media, and he actually brought it up during his Tuesday press conference. He was asked about the unknown of USC's first week with a new defensive coordinator. This is what he had to say. There's a lot of thoughts that kind of go into that. But, Coach Brian Odom has actually called it before. The last time Oregon played against Oklahoma in the Alamo Bowl. So I think there'll be a lot of similarities to some of the stuff that they already do. I think that group will probably have some new wrinkles that we potentially haven't seen, but it all comes back to what football is all about, right? Tackling, blocking, breaking tackles, making catches. So all of those things are going to hold true. And we have to play to our identity. I hope when people watch this team, really on both sides of the ball, you see an identity. And our identity is to hold true regardless of what scheme we see against us. End quote. I really hope Coach Riley heard that last part. I really, really do. Some of you are going to remember I asked Coach Riley specifically about his team's offensive identity. I believe it was after the Arizona game. He wasn't appreciative of that question. USC won the game. I kind of got the snark response. Well, we're the number one scoring offense in the country answer. Well, not anymore. Went over those numbers just a few minutes ago. Coach Lanning's response had some coach speak involved there, but he was alluding to being a good physical team on both sides of the ball. That's what he was talking about. He was also asked about what goes into building an elite defense. Remember, he was trained by Kirby Smart at Georgia before he took over Oregon's job. Young guy, pretty brash as well, if you listen to him talk. You like to watch people's body language. I think he would be comfortable with somebody saying he's arrogant. And that's all right. You can back it up. You're confident. You can be arrogant too. This is what he had to say, though, about building an elite defense. It starts with talent acquisition, right? You have to get guys that can play to the level, the standard that you expect from your team. If you have 11 guys that can play to that standard, you play 11 guys. Fortunately for us, we've been able to acquire great talent that can play to a higher standard. We've also been able to develop talent and have guys that are willing to develop. We have a lot of guys that come in here and they work their tail off. And I always like watching the season and seeing the guys that really aren't involved early in the season become more involved as the season grows, because it tells you that they're getting better as players. But strength in numbers, right? The more you can play at a high level, the better your team's going to be down the stretch. The healthier the team is going to be down the stretch. And the better effort that you'll actually exude on the field. Some of that probably sounded familiar. Riley said some of the same things about development when he took over the program. And as the season goes on having guys go from the scout team to NFL draft picks. So you hear some similarities when you hear Dan Lanning talk and when you listen to what Coach Riley has to say as well. The Pac-12 has 3 second-year coaches, and they're really with the top teams this year. Washington, Kalen DeBoer, second year. His program built off of last season's 11-win season. They're still undefeated this year. USC fans know that intimately. So does Oregon. As I would say, they got a big win already. They've got 2 big wins this year. They beat Oregon, then they came down to LA, beat the Trojans. And Dan Lanning, his team was not an 11-win team in year 1. However, his Oregon team is getting better each week. Right now, they're 8-1, 9-1, whatever their record is. You can see growth and development with that team, though. Each 3 of the teams have good quarterbacks, so they can. That's something that they can fall back onto. I think though, the difference between Washington, Oregon, and USC, Washington and Oregon have an identity. Oregon more so than Oregon more so than Washington, and Oregon and Washington much more so than USC. When you ask who USC is, what their identity is, I think the answer starts and stops with Caleb Williams. I don't know what you would say about the defense, but at least on offense, you say that's Caleb Williams' team. This game itself has some really big picture implications going on here. And this is why it's going to be important for USC's defense to kind of show itself, even on short notice. The Ducks they're having a much better time convincing Southern California defensive recruits to go play away from home, go play up in Eugene, Oregon. A Trojan win this weekend, all things considered, what's going on, I think that could at least stop some of that hype. Not all of it, some of it. And here's why. Oregon's having a really huge gathering of recruits after this game. I mean, it's like one of their biggest recruiting weekends. A USC win this week, that's going to make Dan Lanning's recruiting pitch after the game much more difficult. You're coming off a lost USC win, and let's just be really frank about this. Oregon has to show that we are better than USC. That's how they're building their program. And recent times, they can say, look, we beat them this year, we beat them last year. They've got recent history on their side. Lincoln Riley, Sean Nua, Brian Odom, they got to stem that tide this weekend. It's going to be tough. Because make no doubt about it. If Dan Lanning gets the chance, he's going to make Jim Harbaugh's "What's Your Deal" game. He's going to make that look like child's play. I promise you. If he thinks he has a chance to make 2 after every touchdown, he's going to go for 2 after every touchdown. He's going to try and get to 60 points. He's going to want to embarrass USC on national TV. So, yes, to all of that. I think that's his goal. Remember, big picture implications. USC was going to leave Oregon and Washington behind, go to the big conference. Guess who's riding USC's tailcoat? Yeah, they're riding their tail. Coattails. Dyslexic there. And they're going to be making less money. So Oregon's going to say, you know what? We'll take less money, but we're just going to show everybody that we can beat you again and again and again. Lincoln Riley needs to have this win this week. It's huge. Big picture. Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers, you're going to get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins, period. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action than right now. The app is really super easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including point spreads, player prop bets, over-unders, and a whole lot more. So visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. Is Lincoln Riley shaken or is he stirred up? Lincoln Riley is not James Bond, and I have no idea if he drinks martinis. What he is right now, for the first time as a head coach, is unranked in the playoff poll. First time in his career. When USC fell out of the latest rankings that were just released, Lincoln Riley's streak of 48 consecutive playoff polls being ranked, it was over. His 48 consecutive poll rankings as a head coach at USC and Oklahoma, he only trailed Nick Saban, who has been ranked in all 56 polls while he's been at Alabama. That was one of the data points that people and pundits kind of pointed to when they were comparing Lincoln Riley's resume and his career trajectory. Well, put a line through that one. Question is now, how is he going to bounce back? Well, for one, I'll use Riley's words. He has a really cool opportunity ahead of himself on Saturday. Rhetorical question, obviously. Would a win on the road against the number 6 team in the country start a new streak? I think if USC was to win on the road against Oregon, they would find themselves back in the playoff poll. Not that it matters, but it would start a new streak. You got to start somewhere, right? This is kind of like a new arena for Riley. He's never experienced these types of things. I don't think he's ever had a season like this as a head coach. That you just want to compare wins and losses, going to bowl games. He hasn't. I guess Oklahoma's Alamo Bowl season when he left to come to USC would be the closest. But I mean, think about it. Even when he fired Stoops, defensive coordinator, they still made it to the conference championship game that year. And I know USC isn't officially out of it, but I really don't think a 3-loss team really deserves to make it either. That's just me. If USC's, look, if they get to the conference championship game this year with 3 losses, I'll take it. Don't get me wrong, because that means USC won their last 2 games. But what happens if the Trojans finish 8-4? A win over the Ducks, that's going to give you kind of a change in the optics as far as, recruiting, that type of stuff. Nationally, I think it changes the optics. Or does a win over the Bruins? Which one changes the optics more? As far as I'm concerned, I'm not really going to ever be concerned about UCLA football having a better season than USC. They might on occasion have a better 1-loss record than USC. That happens. But as far as this being a UCLA town, yeah, westward ho, no. They've tried that before. It doesn't work. UCLA is a basketball school. The Bruins would literally, their fan base would rather dribble a basketball. Football season to them is just a really long TV commercial until hoop season comes around. Riley needs to win a big game as USC's head coach. I mean, right now, his biggest win would be last year's win over UCLA and the win on the road at Oregon State. You can throw the win against Notre Dame in there too. But right now, I don't really think he has a really big win on his resume. A win against Oregon, I think, he'll get more street credibility than you will beating UCLA. And I think both Riley and the team, they need this win to kind of shake things up. A win at Oregon will shake things up for them. And then, they'll have that game against UCLA, but at this point, that's all you're going to be playing for to save your season because you don't want to be a 5-loss team. So I think the win up at Oregon is much more important, big picture. And, take a little bit of that smugness away from Dan Lanning. little bit of that temper that arrogance. Maybe Lincoln Riley can ask him for one of his victory cigars and then light it up. Enjoy it with a martini, Lincoln Riley, right? I don't know. Just kind of rambling here at the end. I'm going to talk more about USC Oregon on tomorrow's episode, but kind of want to just throw that out there. Lincoln Riley, first time unranked in the playoff poll. It's a first for everything, and I think Lincoln's experiencing a lot of firsts this year. We're going to find out if he can stem that tide. Big game at Oregon. Go get him. Until then, everyone, you know what to do, right?